For a long time, I thought silence meant peace. That when two people stopped talking, it was only because they had already said everything. But silence can be deceitful. It can hide distance, indifference, even the beginning of an ending you're not ready to see. 15 days after giving birth, I should have been wrapped in joy. I had brought life into the world, a tiny, perfect boy who smelled like milk and warmth. Every breath he took was a small victory, a promise that all the sleepless nights and swollen ankles had been worth it. But as I sat there, in the soft light of the nursery, I began to feel a different kind of weight, one that had nothing to do with my body. Ethan, my husband, moved differently now. His steps no longer had the rhythm of someone rushing home. He spoke less, touched less, and when he looked at me, his eyes wandered past me, as if searching for something behind my shoulder. At first, I blamed exhaustion, his and mine. Maybe we were both drowning in the newness of parenthood. Maybe love, like the body, needed time to recover after birth. But sometimes, the body heals faster than the heart. At night, when the baby finally fell asleep, I would lie beside Ethan and feel the space between us vast, cold, and growing. He turned away before I could reach for him. When I whispered his name, he pretended to sleep. When I asked if he was okay, he smiled faintly and said, "Just tired." That word became his wall, tired. He built it brick by brick until I couldn't see him anymore. And I, foolishly, tried to fix what I didn't break. I brought him coffee in the mornings, folded his shirts carefully, kissed his cheek even when he turned away. But nothing reached him. If you enjoyed my story, you can leave a 1 in the comments. It lets me know these stories still mean something to you. And you, if you were in this person's place, what would you do? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts, so don't hesitate to share them below. I'm always curious to know what people feel, and I'd love to hear where you first came across this story or what made you stay until the end. And if stories like this one touch your heart, please like the video and subscribe to stay with me. There are many more stories waiting for you. Stories where perhaps you might find a part of yourself. It was as if love had left our home quietly, leaving its shoes at the door. One evening, while rocking my son to sleep, I saw Ethan standing by the window, his face lit by the cold blue of his phone screen. He smiled not at me, not at our child, but at whatever glowed in his hand. And in that moment, something deep inside me trembled, like a candle realizing it's about to burn out. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first crack in our world. The moment I began to sense that love, when it dies, doesn't scream. It fades. Softly, politely, almost kindly, until all that's left is the echo of what used to be. I understood that sometimes silence isn't peace. It's the sound of someone leaving without moving their feet. It started with the smallest things, things that could easily be dismissed if I wanted to. A phone face down on the table. A sudden change in the password I had known for years. The scent of cologne, that wasn't his usual one. None of it screamed betrayal. It whispered it, softly, slyly, like smoke curling beneath a closed door. In the early weeks after giving birth, my world was measured in hours of feeding, burping, and rocking. My hair was always tied up, my body still foreign to me. I didn't expect to feel beautiful, but I expected to feel loved. Ethan used to hold me even when I smelled of milk and exhaustion. He used to kiss my forehead when I fell asleep on the couch. Now, he barely looked at me. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Hormones make you paranoid, that's what everyone says. Maybe I was just tired, overthinking, seeing shadows where there were none. But the truth is, instinct rarely lies, it just speaks a language softer than reason. One afternoon, while folding baby clothes, I noticed that Ethan's shirt smelled of a perfume that wasn't mine. It wasn't strong, just a trace, faint but deliberate. It lingered in the air like a secret trying to stay hidden. When I asked him about it, he laughed. You know how offices are. People spray stuff everywhere. He said it casually, without meeting my eyes, already halfway out the door. The way he dismissed it so easily told me more than any confession could. After that, I began to observe him quietly, without accusation. His words, his tone, his absence. He used to text me during lunch, sending photos of his meals or silly jokes. Now, his phone stayed silent all day. If I texted him first, he'd reply with short, polite answers. Busy. Later. Tired. 3 words that built a fortress around him, and I was left outside, knocking on walls that no longer echoed back. At night, he took his phone into the bathroom. He stayed there longer than before, the sound of running water disguising the tapping of keys. When I asked why, he said he liked scrolling news or playing games. But his smile was rehearsed, a little too quick, like a line he'd practiced. Sometimes he'd turn his phone screen away from me, the reflection flashing across his face in secret blues and whites. It was a small gesture barely noticeable to anyone else but to a woman in love. Small things are magnified. We see every detail. We hear what isn't said. We feel the distance before it's measured. One night, I woke up to feed the baby and found Ethan's side of the bed empty. I followed the faint light down the hall and saw him sitting on the couch, his phone pressed close to his face, the glow illuminating his smile. A smile I hadn't seen in weeks. A smile I thought had died. He didn't hear me. For a moment I stood there in the darkness watching him. He looked happy, and that was what hurt the most. I returned to bed quietly, the baby in my arms, pretending to believe that everything was fine. But the seed had already been planted. Doubt doesn't grow in sunlight. It grows in the dark, watered by silence and unanswered questions. And mine was blooming fast. The days blurred together: diapers, feedings, dishes, fatigue. I tried to keep life normal, to hold on to the illusion that our family was still whole. But Ethan's presence felt ghostly. He was there, but not with us. He helped when it was convenient, smiled when others were watching, and the moment the camera of daily life turned off, he retreated into his phone again. He changed his haircut. He bought new shirts. He even began wearing a wristwatch, something he had never cared about before. When I teased him lightly, asking what inspired his new style, he shrugged and said, "Just wanted a change." Change. Such an innocent word, yet so dangerous when it slips into the wrong mouth. I tried to ignore it, but my mind started connecting dots I didn't want to see. The late nights. The new clothes. The faint perfume. The sudden bursts of laughter at texts he wouldn't let me read. Love makes us detectives of our own pain. We notice patterns, shifts, tones, the smallest details that betray a truth we're not ready to face. And yet, even when the evidence is everywhere, we cling to denial like a blanket, afraid of the cold that comes with the truth. One morning, as I was changing the baby, his phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it instinctively. The message preview flashed. "See you soon. Can't wait." It disappeared before I could read the name. When I looked up, Ethan was already there, moving faster than I'd ever seen him move. He grabbed the phone, his face pale, his smile forced. "Work stuff," he said, but his eyes told another story. I didn't say anything. Not then. Because silence in moments like that is more powerful than confrontation. It gives the liar room to reveal himself. That night, when he slept, I lay beside him and stared at the ceiling. The baby's breathing was soft beside me, rhythmic and innocent. I wanted to believe Ethan still loved me, that maybe I was the problem, that maybe motherhood had changed me too much, that the woman he married had vanished beneath stretch marks and sleepless nights. I even blamed myself for his distance. That's what women do when they're betrayed slowly. We turn the blade inward first. But in the quiet, between the baby's sighs and the ticking of the clock, I knew it wasn't me. It was him. He was already elsewhere, emotionally gone, physically drifting. A few days later, the clue I needed appeared, not through luck, but through routine. Ethan forgot his phone at home. It was early morning, and he was already halfway to work when I noticed it on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with notifications, messages, app icons, flashing red dots. My heart pounded in my chest like it was asking for permission to break. I stared at the device, that small black mirror holding the truth I both needed and feared. I told myself not to touch it, that trust means not crossing boundaries. But trust only works when both people honor it. And deep down, I already knew Ethan had stopped honoring anything between us. I unlocked it. His new password was the baby's birthday, ironic, almost cruel, that he used our son's first breath to guard his lies. The first thing I saw was a hidden folder in his photo gallery. Me fingers trembled. I opened it and froze. There I was, naked, wet from the shower, hair clinging to my face, eyes startled. A photo taken from the crack of the bathroom door. My breath caught, the world tilting, sound disappearing. At first, I thought it was some twisted keepsake, maybe he kept it for himself, out of affection. But then I saw the next image. And the next. Unflattering angles. Cruel captions. Sent not saved. He had shared them. My body, raw and postpartum, turned into a joke between men. There, in his group chat, were the comments, laughing emojis, crude remarks, a name that would soon haunt me, Carly. Bro, you upgraded, huh? Good thing you've got Carly now. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. It felt like being stripped twice, once in the photo, and again by the betrayal. Every inch of me that had suffered to bring life into this world was now mocked, ridiculed, used as entertainment. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to wake him, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I did something far more dangerous. I went quiet, deadly quiet. Because silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. I took screenshots of everything, each message, each picture, each insult. Not for revenge, but for truth. I needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that what I felt was real. Then I placed the phone exactly where I'd found it, like a soldier resetting a trap. When Ethan came home that night, I watched him the way one might study a stranger pretending to belong. He kissed my forehead absent-mindedly, asked about the baby, ate dinner, scrolled through his phone again. All routine, all performance. He didn't know I already knew. He didn't see the quiet fire burning behind my eyes. For days after, I carried that secret knowledge inside me. It was heavy, like a stone pressing against my lungs. I moved through life mechanically, changing diapers, doing dishes, humming lullabies, all while the truth gnawed at me. He laughed on the phone sometimes, and each laugh felt like a slap. He slept beside me, and each breath he took felt borrowed. But here's the strange thing about betrayal. It doesn't just destroy your faith in someone else. It forces you to rebuild faith in yourself, to trust your instincts, your strength, your worth. And slowly, painfully, I began to do just that. The night I finally confronted him, it wasn't planned. It wasn't a scene. It was quiet, almost gentle. He was slicing vegetables in the kitchen, humming a song. The baby was asleep. I wiped my hands, turned to him, and asked softly, "How long have you been seeing Carly?" His knife froze midair. For a second, everything stilled: the clock, the air, even my heart. Then came the performance. Confusion, denial, anger. "What are you talking about, Seraphine? You're crazy. You're imagining things." But his eyes betrayed him before his lips could finish the lie. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply held his gaze, steady and cold, until the mask slipped. And then finally, he said it almost with relief. "Yes, I'm with her. No apology. No regret. Just admission. Clean and cruel." For a moment, I felt nothing. No tears, no rage, no words. Only a hollow silence, vast enough to swallow the room. He kept talking excuses, justifications, nonsense. "She makes me feel alive again. You've changed since the baby. We couldn't be intimate." Each word was a nail in the coffin of the love I once believed in. And as he spoke, something inside me, something small but powerful, stood up. I placed the kitchen towel on the counter and said, "I want a divorce." He laughed, thinking I was bluffing, but when I didn't flinch, his smile vanished. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not fear of losing me, but of losing control. I walked past him, into the nursery. My son slept peacefully, untouched by the storm raging in the next room. I kissed his forehead, inhaled his innocence, and realized that this small breathing miracle was the only love that had never betrayed me. That night, I slept beside my child, not my husband. And in the soft rhythm of my baby's breathing, I found something close to courage. The following days were a blur of logistics and numbness. Papers, boxes, calls. My mother's trembling voice when I told her. Friends offering sympathy that felt like pity. But underneath the chaos, there was clarity, a rare, precious stillness that comes only after destruction. I didn't shout. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't send those screenshots to his friends or his boss. I simply left. Because leaving isn't always running away. Sometimes, it's returning to yourself. The first night in my mother's house, I cried until my body ached. Not because I missed him, but because I finally allowed myself to feel everything I had been suppressing for months. Grief for what I lost, anger for what I tolerated, and a strange, fragile relief for what I no longer had to pretend. In the quiet, I understood something I had been too afraid to admit. I had mistaken endurance for love. I thought surviving his absence was proof of devotion. But love isn't supposed to be survived. It's supposed to be lived. From that night on, I began a slow, deliberate act of healing. I fed my son. I slept when I could. I took walks in the cold morning air, feeling my lungs remember what peace tasted like. The world hadn't ended, only the illusion had. Every betrayal leaves a scar, yes, but also a one that leads you back to yourself. And as I followed it, step by step, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. Freedom from questioning my worth. Freedom from chasing apologies that never come. Freedom from shrinking myself to fit into someone else's emptiness. In that freedom, there was pain raw, unfiltered, necessary. But there was also truth. And truth, even when it burns, is the only thing that heals. The truth doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes, it slips in quietly through a half-open door, through a sentence you can't unhear, through the weight of a silence that finally stops pretending to be peace. For weeks after leaving Ethan, I lived in a fog. There were mornings I woke up and forgot for a second that my marriage had ended. For that one soft, blurred moment between sleep and awareness, I almost believed I still had a husband who loved me, that our son still had a father who would come home after work. Then, reality would return sharp, unkind, and cold. The empty space beside me in bed. The quiet phone. The ghost of a life I no longer belonged to. The first few weeks of separation were not strength. They were survival. I moved like someone who had forgotten how to be a person, functioning only for my child. I fed him, rocked him, whispered lullabies I no longer believed in. At night, when he finally slept, I would sit on the floor and stare at the wall. There was no energy left for anger, only an exhausted kind of disbelief. It's strange how betrayal doesn't destroy you all at once. It dismantles you slowly, piece by piece, until you're left sitting in the ruins, wondering which parts of yourself are still real. My mother didn't ask for details. She just let me be fed me soup, held my baby, touched my shoulder when words felt useless. There is a kind of love that doesn't demand explanations. It simply stands next to you until you can stand again. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes I'd brought from our apartment, I found Ethan's envelope of documents, bank statements, receipts, papers from his office. I almost threw it away. But one sheet caught my attention. A hotel invoice. The date made my stomach turn. It was the same week I had been hospitalized after childbirth complications, the same week he had told me he was working late. The evidence was banal, almost boring. Black letters on white paper. But to me, it was an autopsy report, the postmortem of love. I sat there, holding that paper like a relic from a religion I no longer practiced. It wasn't just that he'd cheated. It was when, while I was in a hospital bed, stitched and bleeding, learning how to breathe again, he was in a hotel room tasting someone else's skin. And that detail pierced deeper than all the others. Because it told me something I had refused to believe until now. He hadn't simply fallen out of love. He had abandoned me at my most human, my most fragile, my most real. It wasn't just infidelity. It was desecration. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not out of pain, but out of clarity. It was as if all the noise in my mind had finally stilled, leaving behind a single, blinding truth. He had never loved me in the way I thought he did. He had loved the idea of me, the version that smiled, that pleased, that made him feel strong. But the woman who bled and screamed and carried his child was too real, too raw. He couldn't love her because she reminded him of what love costs. I folded the invoice carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't need to confront him again. I didn't need another confession. The truth had already spoken, not from his lips, but from the emptiness he left behind. Days later, an unexpected message arrived. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The text was short, hesitant. "Hi, Seraphine. This is Carly. I think we should talk." My hands went cold. For a long minute, I just stared at the screen. Her name was a wound I had tried not to touch, a ghost I had refused to summon. I didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to imagine her face. But curiosity is crueler than fear. I typed back, "About what?" The reply came almost instantly. "I didn't know. About you. About the baby. I'm sorry." The message sat there like a drop of acid burning slowly through the numbness. I didn't know what she wanted, forgiveness, understanding, absolution, but part of me needed to hear her, if only to close the door completely. We agreed to meet in a small cafe near the park. When I arrived, she was already there, younger than I expected, nervous, twisting a napkin in her hands. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "You're even more beautiful than he said," she whispered. I almost laughed. Beautiful. After everything, that was the first thing she thought to say. She started talking before I could respond. Her words came in bursts: guilt, confusion, regret. She told me Ethan had said we were separated, that I was unstable after pregnancy, that he was trying to move on. He had painted himself as a victim, hungry for comfort, and she had believed him. When she discovered the truth that I had just given birth, she ended it. Or so she said. I listened without interrupting, my hands around a cup that had long gone cold. Her voice trembled. Mine didn't. She was crying now, saying she never meant to hurt me. But hurt doesn't care about intention. It just does what it does. When she finished, there was a long silence. I didn't hate her. To my surprise, I felt something almost like pity. Because she too had been lied to. Because we were both victims of the same man's cowardice. "You don't owe me anything," I said softly. "You believed what you were told. I did too. We just believed different versions of the same lie." She looked at me with wet eyes, searching for anger, maybe for punishment, but there was none left to give. Anger is heavy. I had carried enough. All I wanted now was lightness. We parted quietly. As I walked home, I realized the truth didn't break me. It released me, because knowing the full extent of his betrayal meant I no longer had to wonder what I could have done differently. The answer was simple: nothing. His choices were never about me. They were about who he was when no one was watching. Healing, I learned, doesn't come in straight lines. It circles back, again and again, testing your wounds. There were nights I still woke up angry, remembering his laugh, his hands, the messages. There were mornings I missed the illusion, not him, but the safety of believing I was loved. But each time the pain returned, it stayed for a shorter visit. Each time, it left behind a little more strength. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found the phone he'd left behind, the one I hadn't touched since moving out. For reasons I can't explain, I turned it on. Old photos, messages, fragments of a life already gone. In one of the folders I found the picture again, the same one he had taken of me in the shower. But this time, seeing it didn't make me flinch. I looked at that woman, her body raw and marked, her eyes half closed in vulnerability, and I felt tenderness. She wasn't broken. She was brave. She had walked through humiliation and still carried love for her child, still woke up every morning to start again. I deleted the photo, not out of rage, but as a ritual. Because sometimes, closure is as simple as pressing delete and meaning it. Months passed. Ethan tried to contact me once, an email full of half apologies and self-pity. He said he missed us, that Carly wasn't what he expected, that he wanted to be part of his son's life again. I read it twice, not because I doubted my answer, but because I wanted to be sure I felt nothing. And I didn't. Not hate, not love. Just a quiet detachment, the kind that comes when someone finally becomes irrelevant to your future. I replied with one sentence: "You no longer have power over me." That was it. No explanations, no accusations. Freedom doesn't require justification. It just is. The truthful, naked, undeniable had done its job. It stripped away every illusion, every maybe, every what if. It left me with emptiness, yes, but also clarity. And in that clarity I began to rebuild. I returned to work part-time. I took my son on morning walks through the park, showing him the trees, the sky, the light. He laughed easily, freely, the way only children who have never known betrayal can laugh. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in a shop window, tired, yes, but peaceful. I was no longer the woman who begged for love. I was the woman who had learned to give it to herself. Healing is not glamorous. It's slow, repetitive, often invisible. It's the act of choosing not to reopen the same wound, even when loneliness whispers that you should. It's the strength to stay soft in a world that taught you to harden. There were still bad days, of course there were. Days when I missed what never truly existed, when my heart ached for the person I thought Ethan was. But even on those days, I no longer doubted myself. I had learned to trust the woman who survived. The truth, I realized, doesn't always heal you immediately. Sometimes it burns everything down first so you can see the sky. And when the smoke clears, you find yourself standing in the ashes, breathing easier than you have in years. I no longer wanted revenge. I no longer needed him to regret losing me. The real revenge was this: to live without bitterness, to raise my child in a home where peace was louder than anger, and to know that love, real love, never humiliates. I taught myself to smile again, not because everything was okay, but because I finally understood. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of acceptance. And that is what the truth gave me. I used to think the truth would destroy me, but it didn't. It stripped me clean, left me bare, and in that bareness, I found myself again. Freedom doesn't arrive as a celebration. It comes quietly like dawn creeping through the curtains after a long night, touching the ruins of what once was and asking, "Are you ready?" When I finally decided to leave for good, there was no grand moment. No screaming, no slammed doors, no dramatic farewell. Just a morning like any other: sunlight on the floor, the smell of coffee, the sound of my son babbling softly in his crib, and me standing in the kitchen realizing I couldn't live another day waiting for something that would never return. Leaving wasn't an act of courage. It was survival. A slow, quiet acknowledgement that staying was killing me, not all at once, but piece by piece. I packed our lives into boxes, not out of anger, but with the precision of someone performing a ritual. Every object I touched carried a memory. The teacups from our honeymoon, the photo from our first apartment, the wedding ring now too heavy for my finger. Each item asked the same question: was it ever real? I didn't have an answer. As I folded the last baby blanket, I heard my mother's car pull into the driveway. She came to help, her presence steady and wordless, like an anchor in stormy seas. She didn't ask for explanations. She didn't need to. Mothers know. They sense the moment their daughters stop being girls and start becoming survivors. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, her hand resting on mine. I nodded, more than ever. She smiled a sad, knowing smile and began lifting boxes into the car. By the time we closed the trunk, the sun had risen fully, spilling light across the driveway. It looked like blessing, though I wasn't sure I believed in blessings anymore. As I carried my son out of the house, he laughed, reaching for the light. I realized he didn't know what was happening. To him, it was just another car ride. And maybe that was for the best. I didn't want his first memories to be of leaving, but of arriving at a place where peace lived. The road stretched ahead, long and unfamiliar. I watched the city fade in the rearview mirror, the skyline, the streets, the house where love had died. For the first time, I didn't cry. There were no tears left for what I had already buried. Only a strange lightness, a space inside me that felt both empty and infinite. When we reached my mother's house, she helped me settle in. It was small, a little old, but full of warmth. The walls carried the smell of lavender and safety. For days, I moved through it like a ghost, cleaning, unpacking, feeding my child. At night I lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering what freedom was supposed to feel like. Because at first, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like loss, raw and echoing. Freedom, I learned, doesn't come with joy. It comes with grief. Because to be free, you must first accept that what you loved has died. There were moments I almost texted Ethan not to go back, but out of habit. Years of shared life don't vanish overnight. Sometimes I'd start typing, "Did you eat?" or "He took his first steps today," then delete the words, ashamed of the reflex. I realized how deeply I had been trained to reach for him, even when he was no longer there. Dependency doesn't dissolve, it unlearns itself slowly. So I began to fill that silence differently. I started writing letters not to him, but to myself. letters I never sent. I wrote about the fear, the exhaustion, the longing to feel whole again. I wrote until my hands ached and my heart softened. Each word was a release, a thread pulling me out of the web I had been trapped in. In one letter, I wrote, "You are not the woman he left. You are the woman who stayed long enough to know when to walk away." That became my mantra. Weeks turned into months. I found a part-time job at a small accounting office. My mother watched the baby while I worked. The first day I put on real clothes, not pajamas, not maternity wear, I cried in front of the mirror. Not from sadness, but from recognition. I could see myself again. Not as a wife. Not as a victim. Just as Seraphine. The office was small but kind. People greeted me with smiles that didn't pry into my wounds. I learned to laugh again, even if softly. Each paycheck felt like more than money. It was proof that I could stand on my own feet, that I didn't need anyone's permission to exist. At home, Myson grew fast. He started to crawl, then walk, then run, chasing light through the living room, his laughter echoing through the house. Sometimes he'd trip and fall, and before helping him up, I'd whisper to myself, "This is how we learn." Because I was learning too how to fall without breaking, how to rise without bitterness. There were still traces of Ethan everywhere. A photo tucked between books, a shirt I forgot to throw away, the smell of his cologne hidden in old fabric. But instead of avoiding those ghosts, I began to face them. I'd hold the photo and say quietly, "Thank you for teaching me what love should never be." Then I'd put it back, not to forget, but to forgive myself for ever believing less than I deserved. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about reclaiming the energy they stole. And day by day, I was taking mine back. The moment I realized I was truly free came unexpectedly. I was walking home from work, the evening sun painting the world gold. The air smelled of rain and possibility. I stopped at a red light, looked around, and suddenly felt content. No weight in my chest. No lingering ache. Just presence. It was the smallest feeling, but it filled everything. That was freedom, not joy, not excitement, but a quiet belonging to oneself. I laughed softly under my breath. The woman who once begged for love was now learning to love her solitude. The woman who once thought she couldn't live without him had built a life where his name no longer mattered. And in that moment I knew, leaving wasn't the end. It was the beginning of becoming. A few weeks later, I saw Ethan again. It happened by accident at a grocery store. He looked tired, older somehow, his eyes avoiding mine until he couldn't. For a brief second, the world fell silent. There was a time when seeing him would have undone me. But now, there was nothing left to undo. He smiled awkwardly, tried to speak, asked how I was. I answered politely, nothing more. He asked about our son. I said he was healthy, happy, and growing fast. When he tried to apologize, I stopped him gently. "Ethan," I said, "you don't need to explain anymore. I've already forgiven you, not for you, but for me." He blinked, unsure how to respond. Then he nodded, looked down, and walked away. And as I watched him leave, I felt the strangest sense of gratitude, not for what he did, but for what it taught me. Because sometimes, it takes being broken by the wrong person to understand your own strength. That night, after putting my son to bed, I stood by the window and watched the moonlight spill across the floor. It reminded me of the first night I discovered the truth, the same pale glow, the same quiet house. But everything inside me was different now. Where there was once fear, there was calm. Where there was once emptiness, there was peace. I whispered softly, "We made it." Not to anyone in particular, but to every version of myself that had survived to get here. The one who cried in the shower, the one who packed boxes with shaking hands, the one who learned to walk again after crawling through heartbreak. Freedom had not come as a prize. It had been earned breath by breath, tear by tear, choice by choice. And though it was quieter than I expected, it was stronger than anything I had ever known. Some nights, when the world feels still, I think about that word freedom. People imagine it as wings, as running, as laughter. But to me, freedom is something else. It's the ability to sleep through the night without wondering if someone is lying beside you or lying to you. It's making breakfast without waiting for footsteps that will never come. It's looking at your reflection and not flinching. It's peace. And peace, I learned, is not the absence of pain, but the decision to stop carrying it. I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. I left because I started loving myself enough to walk away. And that, I realized, is what true freedom looks like. Healing isn't a moment. It's a slow unfurling like a flower learning to trust the sun again after a storm. There is no single morning when you wake up and realize the pain is gone. Instead, you simply notice one day that the silence inside you no longer hurts. It had been a year since I left Ethan. The seasons had changed quietly, marking time not with calendars but with the rhythm of my heart learning to beat again. Spring came gently that year, the kind that smells like new beginnings, wet earth, blooming jasmine, a promise that even the coldest winters end. My son was walking now, fearless, unsteady, curious. He spoke in small bursts of words that made me laugh at their innocence. Every time he reached for me, I realized that love could exist without pain, without fear, without conditions. He was my daily reminder that life continues, that beauty can grow from broken ground. I spent mornings at the kitchen table, writing not letters anymore, but reflections. Little fragments of thought, like prayers. Forgiveness is the bridge between who I was and who I am becoming. Peace is not found, it's built, brick by brick, from the choices we make to stay kind. I didn't write for anyone else. I wrote to remember not what had been done to me, but what I had survived. One afternoon, I took my son to the park. It was the same one Ethan and I had visited years before, back when we still believed in forever. The trees were taller now. The benches had aged. But the sky was still the same deep blue, stretching wide and endless. As my son chased the pigeons, his laughter echoing through the air, I sat on a bench and watched him. There was a peace in that moment that I hadn't known in years, quiet, unremarkable, yet infinite. For so long I thought healing would be loud, triumphant, cinematic. But it was this the ordinary miracle of being okay. A woman sat beside me, maybe in her 40s, reading a book. She smiled at my son, then at me. "You look tired," she said kindly. I laughed softly. "Maybe a little." "You're doing well," she said, as if she somehow knew. And in that simple sentence, from a stranger's mouth, I felt something shift, recognition perhaps. The quiet solidarity of women who have both carried invisible burdens and kept walking anyway. At night, after putting my son to bed, I often sat by the window with a cup of tea. The moonlight pooled across the floor, soft and forgiving. There were no ghosts left to haunt me, only memories that had lost their sting. Sometimes I thought about Ethan not with longing, not with hatred, just curiosity. Was he happy now? Did he ever think of us? But even as the questions rose, they carried no weight. Because the answers no longer mattered. I had learned something precious: closure doesn't come from others. It comes when you no longer need them to explain why they broke you. Healing, I realized, isn't forgetting the pain. It's reclaiming your right to joy despite it. It's standing in front of the mirror and saying, "You're still here. You still shine." As the months passed, I began to dream again of things beyond survival. I took online courses, wrote short essays, even submitted one to a local magazine. They published it under the title, "The Art of Starting Over." When I saw my name printed below it, I cried not from pride but from gratitude. Because the woman who once couldn't look at herself in the mirror was now sharing her truth with the world. The essay ended with these lines: "Healing is not the absence of scars, but the courage to touch them without fear. Pain made me human, but forgiveness made me whole." Letters began arriving from women I didn't know. Some divorced, some betrayed, some still trapped in silence. They thanked me for writing what they couldn't say out loud. Their words reminded me that my story was not unique, and that was the point. Because when pain is shared, it becomes lighter. And when healing is shared, it becomes hope. One morning, I woke early to the sound of rain. The world outside was gray and quiet. I stepped onto the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and let the cool air touch my skin. The rain smelled like renewal. Each drop felt like a small baptism washing away what no longer belonged. I whispered softly to the wind, "I forgive you, Ethan, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." It wasn't dramatic. There was no music, no divine revelation. Just a deep exhale, the kind that empties years of weight from the chest. And in that moment I felt it. The difference between freedom and peace. Freedom is leaving the cage. Peace is realizing the door was always open. As time moved on, I stopped counting the months since the betrayal. Pain had become a distant memory, not a living wound. I started to notice beauty in small things again. The smell of fresh bread, the laughter of strangers, the sunlight through the curtains. I laughed easily now, spoke with warmth, trusted again not others but life itself. There was no more bitterness, no more need to prove anything. I no longer defined myself by what had been taken from me, but by what I had chosen to keep: kindness, strength, love. I had become someone I never imagined. Soft but unbreakable. Alone but never lonely. Wounded but whole. One evening, I found myself sitting on the beach after putting my son to bed at my mother's. The horizon stretched endlessly, the waves breathing in and out like the world itself was meditating. I watched the sea and thought about the girl I used to be, the one who cried in the hospital, who begged for love, who stayed too long in a story that was already over. I didn't hate her. I loved her. Because she had to break so that I could bloom. For the first time, I understood what it meant to come home to yourself. Not the home with walls and doors, but the one within where no one can exile you again. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you for leaving me, Ethan, because losing you made me find me." The tide came in, gentle and forgiving, erasing my footprints one by one. And as I watched them disappear, I smiled. Sometimes, erasure is mercy. Months later, I launched a small online column, Voices of Sister Seraphine. It began as a journal, but soon it grew. Women from all over the world shared their stories of loss, courage, awakening. Their words echoed mine: the betrayal, the loneliness, the slow resurrection of self. And together we built something sacred, a community of truth-tellers, of survivors turned storytellers. Every message I received reminded me why pain must be spoken, because silence protects the wrong people. And healing, like light, needs to be shared. Today, when I look back, I don't see a tragedy. I see a transformation. The girl who once begged for love became a woman who embodies it. The wound became wisdom. The ending became a beginning. Sometimes, I still catch my reflection and think, I survived something that should have destroyed me. But instead, it rebuilt me. Not softer, not harder, just real. I am no longer afraid of being alone, because I know now that solitude is not emptiness. It's the space where your soul breathes freely, where your truth grows wild and unashamed. If I could speak to the woman I was the one crying on the bathroom floor, believing she was unworthy of love, I'd tell her this: one day, you will thank the pain, because it will carve space in you for the light. You will stop chasing love that must be begged for. You will become your own safe place. And that will be your awakening. The night before my son's second birthday, I stood by his crib watching him sleep. His tiny chest rose and fell, his hands curled into fists of innocence. I thought about the journey we had made, from tears to laughter, from loss to light. He would never know the full story, not yet. But one day, I'd tell him. Not so he'd pity me, but so he'd understand that strength is not the absence of pain, it's what you do with it. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You were born from love, not betrayal. Remember that." Because that was the truth I wanted him to inherit. That we are not defined by what breaks us, but by how we rise afterward. Healing didn't make me perfect. It made me whole. And being whole means embracing everything: the scars, the softness, the silence, the laughter. All of it is me. All of it is life. So now, when I tell my story, I no longer tremble. Because it's not a story of betrayal anymore. It's a story of rebirth. And as I end this chapter, not just in words but in my soul, I finally understand. The miracle wasn't that I survived. The miracle is that I learned to love again, starting with myself. There is a silence that comes after every storm. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels full. Full of lessons, of forgiveness, of the gentle hum of life continuing. When I look back now, it feels like I've lived 1,000 lifetimes between that first tear and this moment. I am not the same woman who once begged to be seen. I am the woman who learned to see herself. There was a time when I thought love was everything, that to lose it was to lose the world. But love, I've learned, is not what saves us. Understanding does. Understanding that not every love is meant to last. That some people come to teach you what you should never accept. That endings are not punishments, but redirections. The wound that once bled now breathes. The silence that once suffocated now soothes. The face that once haunted me no longer holds power. I used to pray for him to regret losing me. Now, I only hope he learns to stop breaking what he touches. Because I no longer live in the shadow of his choices. I live in the light of my own. To every woman listening, who has cried behind locked doors, who has stared into the mirror and wondered when she disappeared, who has carried pain like a second skin, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not what happened to you. You are what you chose to do after. You are the breath that steadied itself when the world fell apart. You are the quiet enough whispered through trembling lips. You are the heartbeat that kept going, even when everything else stopped. You do not need to be unscarred to be beautiful. You do not need to be loved to be worthy. You only need to return to yourself, the one who waited patiently while you forgot her. Healing is not about erasing the past. It's about no longer letting it control your future. And one day, you will wake up. Not because the pain is gone, but because you are no longer defined by it. You'll make coffee, open the window, feel the sunlight on your face, and realize you've stopped rehearsing old wounds. You've stopped looking back for apologies that will never come. You've learned that peace is not something someone gives you. It's something you build with your own two hands. And when that day comes quietly, without warning, you'll smile to yourself and whisper, "This is what freedom feels like." There is something sacred about women who rise after being broken. They don't shine the same way. Their light is softer, but deeper. The kind that doesn't dazzle, but warms. They carry wisdom in their eyes, strength in their silence, and grace in the way they let go of what no longer belongs. They no longer seek revenge. Because peace is the most elegant revenge of all. If you are standing in the ruins of a love you thought would last forever, I promise you this is not the end of your story. It's just the page where you begin to write yourself back into it. You will fall in love again, not with another person first, but with mornings, with laughter, with the sound of your own voice. You will learn to dance without waiting for someone to hold you. You will learn that being alone is not the same as being lonely. And someday, if love finds you again, you will recognize it not by how it makes your heart race, but by how calmly it lets you breathe. When I tell my story now, I no longer tremble. Because it is no longer a story of betrayal. It is a story of becoming. The girl who cried on the bathroom floor is gone. The woman who stands here now thanks her. For surviving. For believing that there was something more waiting beyond the pain. And there was. Tonight, as you listen to my voice wherever you are, I want you to close your eyes and remember this. You are allowed to begin again. No matter how many times you've been broken. No matter who walked away. No matter what they said you were. You are allowed to outgrow your grief, to outshine your past, to outlive the version of you that thought she couldn't. You are allowed to be new. The storm is past now. The sky is clear. And as I look ahead holding my child, holding my peace, I know that the woman I've become is not perfect, but real. She doesn't need to be saved. She is her own salvation. And maybe that is the truest form of love. To be whole within yourself, so that when life offers you something beautiful again, you can say yes, not out of need, but out of peace. Because healing was never about forgetting him. It was about remembering me. I am Seraphine, and this was my story. Of breaking, of leaving, of becoming. May it remind you that even the deepest wounds can become wings, and that sometimes the light you've been searching for has always been inside you.